Hey friends, I had a lovely morning this morning, did a nice long Qigong session, and I had a bunch of stuff show up, actually probably more than I can unpack in one post. But one thing that kind of showed up actually as I came out of my morning routine and into my day, because I did this Qigong session this morning, and I've found myself going deeper and deeper in Qigong, and even though I'm not working with a teacher right now, I'm just it's like I'm by being really consistent, new dimensions keep opening up. I keep finding that my body is like, it's opening up in new ways. I find my body reaching for next levels in a way that I can hardly. It's hard to describe exactly what's happening. I just notice I'll have the impulse to stretch really wide, or I'll find myself extending into a push where it's like my back is opening. Physical things that they don't always happen during the practice. A lot of times they happen kind of throughout the day after the practice or in the evening. But I had this interesting experience today, which just makes me, I think what I treat it as is a reminder to remain in contact with my body. The experience I had was did this Qigong session, and I did a nice slow kind of yoga start to it, and the whole thing about both yoga and Qigong is your awareness is traveling into your spine. Our spine is like the source of everything, and an awareness of the spine, alignment in the spine, strength in the spine, flow and movement in the spine. These are the prime things about either yoga or Qigong. In my case, in Qigong, I do a lot of different sequences of Qigong, but all of them, I remember a teacher of mine used to say, he'd see me practicing, and he'd say, "Why are you in your arms? What are you doing in your arms? Your awareness should be in your spine." And I was like, "Oh yeah, right," because I might be doing some whatever thing with my arms, and because that's where the movement is happening, that's where my focus goes. But really, where my focus belongs for the practice to really go deep is in the core of my entire body, in the spine, pelvis, right? Those big kind of like structural components of the body. If our awareness is there, and this is also what Madeline is saying essentially on piano, if our awareness remains in these physical centers of the body, then integrity is a natural outgrowth, because physical integrity, because why would we compromise something fundamental and big for the sake of something subsidiary and small, right? There's no, we would never do, the only reason we'd make that decision is because because of where our focus is. The only reason we would prioritize something that's actually smaller and less significant is because, for whatever reason, our focus has determined that it's smaller and more, that it's more significant, or our focus is restricted to it, and therefore the fact that this tiny little thing is pulling us way off center, we're not aware of it. It's something we would never do consciously, but therein lies the rub, right? We do it unconsciously all the time. So what I noticed this morning was I had this wonderful Qigong session where I really felt like I anchored into my body. I felt waves of energy moving. I felt a real sense of I'm connected to this body. Made Katie and Annalise woke up. I went into the kitchen and made pancakes, and I was cooking in the kitchen for a little while. And at some point, at some break in the activity, I don't even remember what it was, but I stopped and I thought, wait, why am I not in my body? What happens to take me out of my body? I wasn't doing something, particularly demanding. It's not like I was doing something that demanded my mental focus or my physical focus or physical work. I was just making breakfast. And yet I noticed tension in parts of my body where I was like, well, why am I standing at the stove and not anchored in myself? It doesn't make any sense. It makes sense from the point of view of that's habitually, it's a common thing to happen, but it doesn't make any sense from the point of view of it would be so easy to be physically present. So why are we so habituated? Why am I so habituated to not being present to my body? Why am I so habituated to drifting out of that integrity? And this is where, a hundred kind of things kind of collide into this insight. But like, for example, like what Madeline is saying, where we start with the sitting position, the position of what are our contact points and what is our seated posture at the piano. Forget everything first. Just that. Just what is our physical posture at the instrument. And then from there, let the subsidiary portions of the movement take place, but retain that focus in the physical, on the fundamental. It's like keeping our awareness on the foundation so that the building can grow tall, or keeping our awareness on the roots so that the tree can grow tall. But the funny thing is, I think I'm better at that at the piano than I am at cooking breakfast, because I practice it at the piano. Even though playing piano is wildly more complicated than stirring a pot on the stove. So you would think that compromising my physical integrity would be more likely, except that I understand that piano is a practice and I engage with it consciously as a practice. I settle into, there's a whole complex of kind of checklists, and it's almost like the telemetry on a race car or something that comes online. When I sit down at the instrument, all of a sudden, little micro movements in my wrist I'm aware of. Little micro movements in my neck and shoulders and back and hips and legs and feet and everything. I'm aware of, because I'm habituated to pay attention to them. I'm not habituated to pay attention to those micro movements when I'm standing at the stove. So I don't, and that's kind of the thing. I think what's showing up is that we live so much of our lives in states and in activities where we're not habitually connecting with our body. Not even leaving aside, the sort of emotional, spiritual domains of existence that are also right there, and that there are also sort of they raise the question: why would we ever leave? Why would we ever leave a state of peace and integrity? Sadhguru asks a great question of I saw a video the other day. Somebody asked him, what do we do when we get angry? What to do about anger? And he said, and his first response was, well, you're asking that question as though you presume anger is a natural thing. And he said, we don't get to determine what happens outside of us, right? We can't, the world, other people, we don't determine what happens outside of us. But we should be able to determine what happens inside of us. In other words, anger is a choice. Compromising our integrity, me deciding to not feel my body, is a choice. I make the choice without really thinking about it, and I make the choice kind of with I make it out of habit. I don't make it as a chosen choice each time, but it's a choice. It's not something happening to me. And I think, where this kind of leads me is just to a place where I appreciate an approach to life that really maximizes the amount of time that I spend in practice. Practice being anything from piano to Qigong to meditation to writing to any creative pursuit that you might think of, any physical discipline, any of these things, therapy, working on a relationship, like anything that could be approached consciously, you can have a life practice. And I think what I'm realizing is, because of course on some, we all know all of life is a practice, right? We know life is it's like the ultimate video game. We're here in this dimension that on some level is an illusion from the most kind of cosmically oriented perspective. This is an illusion, but it's also real. It's also an experience for an infinite being to have. So how much of that can we I think for me, what I'm trying to do is frame as much of my life as I can as a practice, because that's what allows me to be conscious. That's how I habituate conscious choices and connection and just being present. Because anytime I'm not in a practice, anytime that I'm in normal life, it's like I very quickly make choices that take me out of awareness, that take me out of consciousness. And I think there's no reason for that. There's no good reason for that. The only reason for that is because that's my habit, And I'm not, you could obviously take this, you could take this too far. There's a part of me that's like, but that sounds oppressive to be constantly hyper aware of my physical body, or like standing at the stove and I'm like doing a Qigong stance at the stove or something. Like I think you could take this to a level where it gets in the way. It gets where there's an overemphasis on what are we trying to be aware of. That's the thing about a practice, right? A practice is a deliberate focus of our attention. When I'm at the piano, my awareness is doing something very specific. When I'm doing Qigong, when I'm meditating, awareness is doing something very specific. And the question is, when is that appropriate? How much of that is appropriate? And when is it appropriate to let ourselves be moved by, to let my awareness drift out of my body? Because why? Because my awareness is being used somewhere else, and I can't quite do it all right now. Right, to do that right now would be like diving into to try and do these two things at once would be like trying to play both hands of a really complicated piece before I even know what either hand is supposed to be doing. And it's not that it's not possible. It's just that that's not where I am. So that leads me to a place of just kind of holding all this gently, being, not too obsessive about, oh, I fell out of integrity. I fell out of physical integrity because I was cooking breakfast. But to kind of come back full circle to my original kind of recognition, there's a sense that that practice is sort of like it's like the fulcrum that we can use for our awareness to grow. It's the thing, it's the lever, it's the way that we can allow ourselves to dig into life. It's like I excavate or drill my foundation down into the ground through practice, and it roots me, and I become more connected. So and then there's the kind of ultimate practice of letting go, right? The practice of a kind of spiritual faith that our awareness is limited. Our awareness may not be limited, but our material, our personal ego, this body-mind experience is limited. Can we trust that it's going where it needs to go? Can we let go enough that the natural drift, the natural flow can happen? It reframes the nature of practice in a way. It's like there's a sense that practice can be in harmony, in alignment with something beyond our immediate consciousness, but beyond what's immediately apparent to us. And it opens the door to just letting ourselves discover what today's practice is. Today's practice might not be Qigong. Today's practice might be making pancakes. That's exciting to me. As someone who has a tendency to get very intense about practices, the notion that letting go is itself a practice, and that letting go into the flow of life, that can be a practice, is empowering, and I think it's a relief. So that's where I'm landing today. Thanks for watching, people. Appreciate you. Love you. Have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow.